So I want to start first with some of the trends that are going on in the world. And it's our belief in McKinsey that the next 20 to 30 years in the world are going to be historic from a 300-year time frame. And that's a pretty outrageous thing to say. I won't be around in 300 years for you to test that. But what I will say is when we look at each of the forces that are going on, they are significant in themselves to lead to a massive amount of change. So that's the context in which we're operating. And there are 5 forces. The first is really around the rise of the emerging markets. And if there's one number I'd want to leave with you on this, is over the next 10 to 15 years, we are going to see 2.2 billion middle-class consumers enter the workplace. 2.2 billion. That's 1,000 times larger than what happened in the Industrial Revolution. And that's driven by urbanization. Every day in China, no matter what, 250,000 people, so on a weekly basis, 250,000 people move from rural areas to cities. Didn't matter if there was SARS, H1N1, the great financial crisis, we have urbanization, it's a force of gravity. So we have a huge demographic shift in terms of a middle-class population. The second trend is really around resource scarcity. Those 2.2 billion middle-class consumers all want to eat and consume like we do. Those 2.2 billion are primarily located in Asia, but also Africa, somewhat in South America, but primarily in Asia and in Africa. The consumption that's going to be required on food, water, and energy is going to be significant. We think there'll be an increase in food demand of 40% over the next 25 years. We think there could be a shortage of water. We did some of that work with some of the ministers in the Kazakh government on this, a shortage of water by 2030 of 40% versus the supply. So we have resource scarcity. I would say, again, these 2 trends put Kazakhstan right in the middle of opportunity in terms of being able to provide the resources and capabilities to fuel this, not only with the geographic location that's there. The third trend is the digital or technological transformation. We think we're in the digital age. We could spend hours talking about that. All I would say is that technology is affecting every organization on the planet, and the speed with which it's moving is very difficult for organizations to keep up with. The ability to be able to accept new technology in different parts of the world quickly is escalating. Every year in the world, we are collecting more data than we did in our last 2,000 years as humans. So the amount of information we're collecting is huge, and that information is being used effectively by organizations. We have 3D printing. We have a machine-to-machine economy, just machines speaking to each other, which is today the size of the global economy in 1990 with no workforce. So this technological change is something we all are going to need to grapple with. The fourth is an aging global population. There are going to be 400 million people over the age of 65 in the year 2030. We'll have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 14. And demographics is a very important factor for productivity. He or she who has more labor gets the labor productivity push. And for many countries, including China, Korea, Japan, Europe, we're going to see a very significant aging situation. Fortunately, in Kazakhstan, we have a young population, a dynamic population. We need to think about how we harness that talent and educate it effectively. And the fifth force is around the market state, the competition amongst countries to be able to attract the foreign direct investment, to attract the talent, to be able to ensure that business can be able to grow is going to increase over time. We're seeing that in different parts of the world. So those are the 5 forces. We think, again, any one of those would be significant from a historic period. You put all 5 together, we get a 300-year shifter. So that's the mindset that we need to think about. Related to that set of trends that's going on is the implications for business. One piece of work that we did was we looked at companies that were in the S&P 500. That means that you are a large, successful company. And in 1935, if you were in the S&P 500, your average lifetime was 90 years. That's how long you would live for. In the year 2011, the average lifetime of a company is 18 years. And that worries me. And McKinsey, we're about at our 90th anniversary. So I'm nervous about whether we are changing fast enough to keep up. And I think every organization needs to think about the treadmill that's operating. And that goes for businesses. It also goes for governments and how they work as well. And it's very difficult, and there are some better experts than me around this table to talk about change management, but it's very difficult for organizations to change and transform. And that's why I'm inspired by this meeting here. Making a bold statement is the first part of it, to say we are going to change. It's public. And we all know the story about IBM in 1993, a storied technology company that almost went bankrupt and then did a very successful turnaround. The chairman mentioned before some of the others, GE, we've got BAE Systems here, Walmart, Sberbank, BMW. This is part and parcel of what we do to try and be able to make change. So that's the context. If we then look at some of the companies that are in the portfolio of Samruk-Kazyna, we see some excellent organizations. And as the president said, though, I think we have to look globally at how they're doing. And what we find is the companies do quite well from a profit margin or EBITDA point of view. It's really in the capital turnover side of things where we need to see some improvements. And then when we look at actually Samruk-Kazyna has actually been doing quite well from a dividends point of view, but we think about economic value added and how that's moving. That's an area where we need to move as we go forward. And there's obviously a lot more work that is going on in this to be able to push it forward. As I mentioned, change is difficult. About 70% of change programs fail. So it's easy to say you want to change, but how do you actually do it? And remember again that treadmill is going faster and faster as we go through it. And again, the leadership in Samruk-Kazyna are thinking very carefully about how to do change and where it is. I think that there are some excellent examples to learn from in other parts of the world. I do think Astana in Malaysia, who's now at their 10th anniversary, a similar program of benchmarking where they are globally with their portfolio of companies, putting in place a very aggressive change program in their companies, and then seeing very visible performance results. Temasek was doing that before. So there are places that we can learn from. The final page I just wanted to talk about is, in order to be able to deliver the transformation and the improvement, we think there are 4 areas in particular that we need to focus on. The first is actually laying out a detailed blueprint, and it's at least at 3 levels. The first is the governance, and the chairman talked about that before, getting the right governance in place to be able to help steer and put the right pressure, if you will, on the company is key. The second is actually the portfolio restructuring. Are we in all the right businesses that we want to be in? Is the ownership structure right in how we drive it, the portfolio restructuring? And then the third is the nitty-gritty value improvement, which is on the cost side, on the capital efficiency and other areas. These are areas we need to move. The second part of the transformation that we think will be key is that we need to ensure we have involvement of the board of directors and the management team. The board of directors are not some piece of window dressing on the side. They actually play a role, and I can see by the type of directors that you've been hiring in that this is going to be a force for positive change. The third is around people. It's our belief that he or she who has the most best people is going to win at the end of the day. So the talent management that the chairman talked about before is absolutely critical to it. This is something that the leadership, Tan Sri Yasman at Kazyna would say. This is what Ho Ching at Temasek would say. It's about the people, the leaders that you have. Where do you find them? How do you train them? How do you build them? And then the final point is actually the support and backing at the very highest levels, at the president level, at the prime minister level. we need the support there to be able to drive through that. And we look at similar transformations again in Malaysia. We see them in Singapore. We now see them actually even in Norway. You have strong support and backing like we're seeing today.